Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker, and in today's video I'm starting a bit of a series in which I look back on some of the worst number one overall picks in NBA history and talk about why exactly those players were picked above every single other player in that class and why it ultimately went so poorly. But really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy these kinds of videos and the NBA, then consider subscribing. I upload every single day. Okay, so we're going to begin this series by talking about Anthony Bennett, who is arguably the worst number one overall pick in NBA history and maybe even sports history as a whole, and why in the world this guy was picked number one overall over some other players in this class, most notably future MVP Giannis Antetokounmpo. And what makes this a particularly interesting number one overall pick is it wasn't a typical bust situation where a guy shows up to the league, shows off some skill, but it just doesn't work out, or he doesn't work on his game, or maybe there's some injury issues and there's some things that are kind of holding him back. No, Anthony Bennett never showed any kind of potential, any kind of flash, anything that would have made him worthy of a top 10 pick, much less the first overall pick. He showed up and pretty much stunk right away, which is unprecedented for a number one overall pick. And just to further illustrate that point, here are some facts about the beginning of Anthony Bennett's NBA career. He missed the first 16 shots of his career in the regular season. He didn't even score a field goal until the Cavaliers' fifth game in his rookie year. And just for a little bit more context, Ja Morant, who's probably going to win the Rookie of the Year for this season, has already scored over 400 more points in just his rookie season than Anthony Bennett did in his entire four-year career, and that is with a shortened rookie season for Ja Morant. And so basically there was never really a moment in which Anthony Bennett looked like he truly belonged in the NBA. He showed up, he lost his confidence, he played on 4 teams in 4 years, and shortly after, he was out of the league. So what exactly happened here? Why was he picked first overall, and what went wrong? Okay, so first let's talk about some of the positives of Bennett as a draft prospect at the time back in 2013, and then we'll go into some more behind the scenes stuff as to why the Cavaliers actually made this selection. So as is often the case with highly drafted NBA players, Bennett was one of the best high school players in his class, pretty much a consensus top 10 recruit and a McDonald's All-American in the high school class of 2012, and ended up going to play in college at UNLV. And here is a NBADraft.net evaluation of his strengths heading into the 2013 draft. First of all, his NBA comparison is Rodney Rogers / Jason Maxiell. Not a great start for a number one overall pick, but anyway, says strengths. Bennett has expanded his game offensively and become almost unguardable during his first season of college ball. Bennett's transition to the college game has been seamless. What grabs your attention about him is his focus and intensity. Imposing physical specimen, huge hands, wide shoulders, and an enormous wingspan gives him great ability to dunk the ball with power. Very athletic, long, quick, and fast. With a 7'1" wingspan and impressive vertical, he poses nightmare problems in terms of mismatches. And honestly, when you read this, if this stuff was actually true as he translated into the NBA, this guy's pretty ideal for the modern game, right? Like, yeah, he's a little bit of a tweener, and that was in the weaknesses section that I'm not going to show here, but essentially part of the issue was people didn't really know what position he was going to play. Is he a 3? Is he a 4? He's only 6'7". But for the modern game, he's got, plenty of the tools you would want. The athleticism, showed some skill, shot a pretty good percentage from 3 in college, and looked like a pretty nice, versatile front court player. Maybe not worth a number one overall pick, but at least a usable player now in 2020. And in his one season at UNLV, as I said, he put up some respectable numbers and looked like he could be a nice, versatile offensive player moving forward. However, he was, and I cannot overstate this, he was never in contention to be the first player selected in this draft. I could not find a single mock draft or article or bit of information that suggested that Anthony Bennett was going to be the number one overall pick or that he should be the number one overall pick. Absolutely nothing pointed in that direction. Which of course brings up the question, why exactly did the Cavaliers go ahead and draft a player that, yes, was talented, but was also one of the most polarizing players in the class in terms of how much of his upside he would actually capitalize on when he got to the NBA, and wasn't in contention for the first overall pick? How exactly did they get there? Well, there's actually some interesting behind the scenes information in an article that I read on The Athletic. And essentially, Chris Grant was the GM of the Cleveland Cavaliers at the time, and he was not a big fan of Anthony Bennett. He didn't think that he should have been the number one overall pick and just didn't love him as a prospect as a whole. He notably had his eye on Ben McLemore, the guard out of Kansas at the time, not necessarily to pick with the first pick in the draft, but just in general liked him as a prospect. And the general vibe was that the Cavs wanted to trade back from the first overall pick. The problem was this was a 2013 draft that pretty much everybody knew wasn't very strong, and there wasn't really a consensus number one player to trade up for, so the market wasn't great for that kind of opportunity. Now, interestingly, for a lot of the college season, there was actually a consensus number one college player in this draft, and it was Nerlens Noel, the center out of Kentucky. But he got hurt, and that caused a lot of uncertainty at the top of the draft, and he ended up going 6th overall. And if Noel never got hurt, the Cavs likely would have had a much better chance at trading that first overall pick for a team that needed a 5-man, because the Cavs really didn't need one. They had Tristan Thompson. They probably would have traded out and picked someone like McLemore, who didn't have a hugely relevant NBA career, but was at least better than the absolute bust that was Anthony Bennett. But the other interesting part of this is leading up to the draft, when the Cavs were deciding who they were supposed to draft and who they wanted to draft, they held a vote within their front office members, and Chris Grant, the GM of the Cleveland Cavaliers, was the only person to vote against drafting Anthony Bennett. The vote was 9-1 to select Anthony Bennett number one overall, and Chris Grant, the general manager of the team, was like, no, I don't want this guy. And they went ahead with it anyway. And that should have been a gigantic red flag. One, that someone so, not out of nowhere, but someone that wasn't really in contention for the first pick was, the people in the front office had such a strong belief that he was going to be this great NBA player, which was, of course, wrong. But then also the fact the general manager doesn't even want the guy, that's not a great sign. But because of the almost consensus view that they should pick Bennett, that's what they ended up doing. Now, as I said, in an ideal circumstance, it's clear that the Cavs wanted to trade back and pick someone else within the top 10. But to be fair to them, all of the other players that were in contention to potentially be the number one overall pick in this class, not many of them really turned out to be very good players. And the only one that turned out to be a great player was Victor Oladipo, who went number 2 overall. Apart from that, there are some solid players moving along in this class, like Otto Porter Jr. and CJ McCollum and Steven Adams, and of course Giannis Antetokounmpo, but none of those guys were really in contention for the first pick other than Oladipo. So they weren't really in a great situation in general. Now, of course, you could make that exact same argument about guys that shouldn't have been in contention for the number one overall pick for Bennett himself, but I did want to take a few sentences there to defend the Cavs a little bit in what was a historically bad and weak draft. And obviously, Giannis ended up becoming an MVP in this class, but that was something that nobody really saw coming. There was clearly some potential there for Giannis, but the risk was so high that there's no way you're taking someone like that number one overall. And more likely, it would have been someone like potentially McLemore or Victor Oladipo, or as I said, moving back within the top 10. So that's essentially why Anthony Bennett was picked number one overall in 2013. Now, why did it go poorly once he got to the NBA? Well, there are multiple reports that Bennett was just used to, at the high school and to a lesser extent the college level, being bigger, more athletic, and stronger than everybody that he played against, and he used that to be a really successful player, and credit to him for that. But once he got to the NBA, and this is not me making this up, this is a reported thing, once he got to the NBA, he just wasn't as motivated to work hard, to be in shape, to work on his skills, because things got difficult, and he was playing against guys that were similar level athletes to him, that were bigger than him, that were stronger than him. And once things got tough, he just wasn't willing to continually work on his game, work on his fitness, and things like that. And ultimately, that is what, ended his NBA career so quickly. It's not that he was just so untalented that he couldn't have made it, but pretty quickly it became clear, even to the Cavaliers, who obviously were trying to be optimistic about the situation, that he just didn't have the necessary work ethic and the desire and the drive to really improve as an NBA player, which caused him to flame out quicker than probably any number one overall pick ever, and become arguably, as I said in the beginning, the worst number one overall pick, not only in NBA history, but potentially in sports history as well. And probably the only argument against that would be that it's pretty easy to, go away from a number one overall pick in the NBA. You can trade them away, and the financial difficulties aren't as severe as for, the NFL, for example. But still, this is a true disaster story of a player coming number one overall, and that is why Anthony Bennett was picked there back in 2013. And yeah, there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.